The story behind Gladiator begins long before cameras rolled across the fields of England or the ancient streets of recreated Rome. Although the finished film would become one of the defining historical epics of the 21st century, its journey from an idea to an Academy Award-winning production was anything but straightforward. It was a project built from fragments of history, artistic ambition, commercial risk, and countless creative decisions that gradually transformed a simple concept into one of cinema's most celebrated achievements. During the 1990s, Hollywood had largely moved away from producing large-scale historical epics. The genre that had once dominated theaters during the 1950s and 1960s had fallen out of favor. Massive productions featuring ancient civilizations, biblical stories, or Roman history were considered expensive and financially dangerous. Several historical films released during previous decades had struggled to attract audiences, convincing many studio executives that viewers no longer wanted sword-and-sandal adventures. Despite this belief, director Ridley Scott had long been fascinated by visual storytelling set in distant worlds. Whether those worlds existed in the future, as seen in Blade Runner and Alien, or in historical settings, Scott believed that audiences could become immersed in environments that felt authentic and emotionally believable. His approach was never simply about recreating history. Instead, he sought to build worlds that served powerful human stories. The earliest spark for Gladiator did not originate from an existing novel or classic screenplay. Instead, it emerged from a simple but compelling question. What if the greatest general of Rome lost everything and was forced to fight as a gladiator? This premise immediately combined personal revenge with the grandeur of the Roman Empire, offering both intimate emotional stakes and spectacular action. One of the key figures responsible for developing this idea was producer Douglas Wick. He had been searching for a historical project that could revive the epic genre while still appealing to modern audiences. Wick believed that the emotional core of the story needed to be universal rather than academic. Instead of focusing solely on historical events, the film would center on loyalty, betrayal, honor, family, and vengeance. These timeless themes would allow viewers to connect with the characters regardless of their knowledge of Roman history. An important source of inspiration arrived in an unexpected form. Producer Douglas Wick became fascinated by a nonfiction book titled Those About to Die by Daniel P. Mannix. Published in the 1950s, the book explored the brutal world of Roman gladiatorial combat. Rather than presenting gladiators as mythical heroes, it examined the harsh realities of their lives, the politics surrounding the games, and the role these spectacles played in Roman society. The book itself was not adapted directly into Gladiator. Instead, it served as a valuable source of historical atmosphere and detail. It demonstrated that gladiatorial combat was not simply entertainment, but also a powerful political tool. Roman emperors used the games to influence public opinion, distract citizens from political problems, and reinforce their authority. This historical context would become one of the film's defining themes. Once the basic concept had taken shape, screenwriter David Franzoni became heavily involved in developing the story. Franzoni had always been interested in history and believed there was enormous dramatic potential in ancient Rome. Rather than creating a documentary-style recreation of actual historical events, he wanted to craft an original narrative that could exist naturally within the real historical setting. Franzoni's early screenplay introduced many of the central ideas that remained throughout development. The protagonist would be a respected Roman general. He would be betrayed after the death of an emperor. His family would be murdered. Forced into slavery, he would become a gladiator whose victories in the arena would eventually bring him face to face with the man responsible for destroying his life. While these broad story elements remained remarkably consistent, the details changed repeatedly during development. Characters were rewritten, motivations evolved, and relationships became more emotionally layered. The screenplay went through numerous revisions as different writers attempted to strengthen both the political intrigue and the personal drama. DreamWorks Pictures and Universal Pictures eventually partnered to finance and distribute the project. The collaboration was significant because the production required an enormous financial commitment. Recreating the Roman Empire demanded elaborate sets, thousands of costumes, large-scale battle sequences, and cutting-edge visual effects. The estimated production budget eventually reached approximately $100 million, making it one of the most expensive films of its time. For studio executives, this represented a considerable gamble. There was little evidence that audiences still wanted Roman epics, and no recent blockbuster had successfully revived the genre. However, the combination of Ridley Scott's reputation, the strength of the central story, and confidence in the production team persuaded the studios to move forward. Ridley Scott officially joined the project after being shown one particular image. Producer Douglas Wick presented him with a painting by French artist Jean-Léon Gérôme titled Police Verso. The 19th century artwork depicts victorious gladiators standing inside the Colosseum as spectators demand the fate of the defeated. The dramatic lighting, emotional intensity, and overwhelming scale immediately captured Scott's imagination. Scott later explained that the painting convinced him almost instantly. He could envision the movement of the crowd, hear the roar of thousands of spectators, and imagine the cinematic possibilities of placing audiences directly inside ancient Rome. That single piece of artwork effectively transformed the project from an interesting script into a film he passionately wanted to direct. When Gladiator entered production, one of its greatest strengths was having a director whose career had already demonstrated an extraordinary ability to create immersive cinematic worlds. Ridley Scott was not simply hired to oversee another historical drama. He was chosen because of his unique visual style, his meticulous attention to detail, and his ability to combine intimate human stories with breathtaking spectacle. His vision ultimately transformed Gladiator from a conventional revenge tale into a timeless cinematic epic that resonated with audiences around the world. By the year 2000, Ridley Scott had already established himself as one of the most visually influential filmmakers in modern cinema. His earlier works included Alien, Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise, Black Hawk Down, and numerous acclaimed commercials. Although these films belong to very different genres, they all shared common characteristics. Scott consistently focused on creating believable environments that felt lived in, textured, and authentic. Whether depicting futuristic cities, isolated spacecraft, or historical landscapes, his worlds always seemed to exist long before the audience arrived. Scott's filmmaking philosophy centered on visual storytelling. Rather than relying heavily on exposition or lengthy dialogue, he believed that images could communicate emotion, history, and character more effectively than words alone. Every costume, every building, every weapon, every shaft of sunlight, and every landscape contributed to the audience's understanding of the story. This philosophy became one of the defining creative principles behind Gladiator. One of Scott's primary artistic goals was to make ancient Rome feel immediate rather than distant. Many historical films before Gladiator presented the Roman Empire as something polished, theatrical, or museum-like. Scott wanted audiences to forget they were watching history. He wanted them to feel as though they had been transported directly into the 2nd century, experiencing its beauty, violence, politics, and uncertainty firsthand. Achieving this required rejecting many of the visual conventions established by earlier Roman epics. Classic films often portrayed Rome as brightly lit, pristine, and orderly. Scott instead embraced imperfection. Armor became scratched and dented. Soldiers were exhausted and covered in mud. Cities appeared crowded, smoky, and noisy. Markets overflowed with people, animals, and goods. Nothing looked artificially clean. Every environment carried visible signs of daily life. This commitment to realism extended to Scott's treatment of violence. Gladiator contains numerous battle scenes, but violence is never presented as glamorous entertainment. Every sword strike carries weight. Every death has consequences. Combat is physically exhausting, emotionally draining, and psychologically damaging. Scott wanted viewers to appreciate not only the excitement of battle, but also its terrible human cost. The opening battle in Germania perfectly demonstrates this philosophy. Instead of filming elegant formations with brightly colored costumes under clear skies, Scott filled the battlefield with fog, mud, smoke, fire, arrows, screaming soldiers, and brutal hand-to-hand combat. The result feels chaotic and overwhelming rather than choreographed. Viewers experience confusion similar to what the soldiers themselves might have felt. Scott's visual influences came from a wide variety of artistic sources. Unlike directors who relied primarily on other films, Scott frequently drew inspiration from classical paintings, photography, architecture, and historical artwork. One of the most significant inspirations for Gladiator was the painting Pollice Verso by French artist Jean-Léon Gérôme. The dramatic depiction of gladiators inside the Colosseum profoundly influenced Scott's vision of the arena sequences. The painting captured more than architectural accuracy. It conveyed emotion through composition, lighting, and scale. Scott recognized that ancient Rome was not simply a historical setting, but also an emotional landscape where thousands of lives intersected beneath enormous monuments. He translated this artistic approach into moving images throughout the film. Scott also admired painters who used natural light to create mood. This influence can be seen repeatedly in Gladiator. Interiors often rely on candles, torches, and sunlight streaming through windows rather than artificial-looking illumination. The result gives every scene warmth, depth, and realism while emphasizing the emotional state of the characters. Another defining element of Scott's vision was his fascination with atmosphere. He has often described filmmaking as creating experiences rather than merely recording events. Every location in Gladiator possesses its own distinct emotional identity. The forests of Germania feel cold, damp, and dangerous. The Roman camps appear disciplined and orderly. The slave caravans convey hopelessness and exhaustion. The gladiator training grounds feel oppressive and brutal. The Colosseum radiates overwhelming power and spectacle. Meanwhile, Maximus' visions of his family home are bathed in golden sunlight, soft wind, and peaceful silence. These contrasting environments help audiences instinctively understand where they are emotionally without requiring lengthy explanations. Scott also approached character development through visual symbolism. Maximus is introduced as a man deeply connected to nature. Before battle, he touches the wheat in his memories, rubs earth between his fingers, and values family above political ambition. These recurring visual motifs distinguish him from Commodus, who is almost always surrounded by marble, gold, shadows, and enclosed spaces. Rather than explicitly stating that one man represents life, while the other represents corruption, Scott allows these visual contrasts to communicate the idea naturally. His attention to costume design further reinforced characterization. Maximus' clothing gradually evolves throughout the story. At first, he wears the polished armor of a respected Roman general. After betrayal, his appearance becomes rough, worn, and practical. As he rises through the gladiatorial ranks, elements of both identities merge. He becomes neither general nor slave alone, but something entirely new. Commodus experiences a different visual progression. His robes become increasingly elaborate and luxurious, even as his emotional stability deteriorates. The contrast suggests that external displays of power cannot hide internal weakness. One of the greatest achievements of Gladiator is the way it constructs an ancient world that feels believable, immersive, and alive. While many historical films rely primarily on costumes and famous landmarks to convince audiences they're visiting another era, Gladiator goes much further. Every location, every piece of architecture, every sound, every costume, and every environmental detail works together to create the illusion that the Roman Empire is not simply being recreated, but is actively functioning around the characters. The audience is not merely observing history. They are placed inside a civilization at the height of its power, where political ambition, military conquest, and public entertainment shape the lives of millions. The world of Gladiator is built upon a careful balance between historical inspiration and cinematic storytelling. The filmmakers did not attempt to produce an exact reconstruction of the Roman Empire as historians understand it today. Instead, they focus on capturing what ancient Rome felt like emotionally. The result is a world that may simplify or alter certain historical facts, but succeeds in creating an atmosphere that feels authentic and emotionally convincing. The film immediately establishes its setting through contrast. Rather than opening in the grand city of Rome, it begins far from the capital, deep within the forests of Germania. This decision is important because it reminds viewers that Rome's enormous empire extended well beyond its famous marble buildings. The Roman military constantly fought campaigns along distant frontiers, defending and expanding the empire's borders. The forests of Germania present nature as wild, unpredictable, and hostile. Thick fog hangs between towering trees. Snow covers the ground. Smoke drifts across the battlefield. The landscape feels cold, damp, and unforgiving. This environment reflects the brutal reality faced by Roman soldiers stationed far from home. The setting also introduces one of the film's recurring themes. Civilization constantly struggles against chaos. Unlike the carefully organized Roman military camps, the forests cannot be controlled. Nature remains indifferent to politics or empire. Even the most disciplined army must adapt to its unpredictable conditions. This relationship between humanity and the environment becomes an important visual motif throughout the film. The Roman military camps themselves represent another aspect of the film's world building. They are not portrayed as temporary collections of tents, but as highly organized communities built upon discipline and efficiency. Roads are carefully arranged. Supplies are managed systematically. Soldiers perform assigned duties with precision. Fires burn throughout the camp. Blacksmiths repair equipment. Horses are prepared for battle, and officers coordinate military strategy. These details communicate the extraordinary organizational power that allowed Rome to dominate much of the known world. The audience understands the strength of the empire not because characters explain it, but because every aspect of military life demonstrates order and professionalism. Perhaps the most impressive example of world building arrives when the story moves to Rome itself. The city is introduced gradually rather than all at once. As characters approach the capital, viewers begin to appreciate its overwhelming scale. Massive walls surround the city. Crowded streets overflow with merchants, laborers, soldiers, politicians, slaves, and citizens from across the empire. Every corner appears busy with economic, political, and social activity. The filmmakers understood that Rome was not merely a beautiful city. It was the center of one of history's greatest civilizations. As a result, they designed it to feel immense, complex, and constantly active. Markets contain exotic goods from distant provinces. Languages and accents vary among background characters. Religious statues stand beside government buildings. Wealth and poverty exist side by side. This diversity reinforces the idea that Rome is an empire rather than simply a nation. People from different cultures, backgrounds, and regions coexist under Roman authority, creating an urban environment unlike anything else in the ancient world. The architecture plays a crucial role in establishing the city's identity. Towering columns, enormous temples, triumphal arches, marble staircases, and monumental public buildings constantly remind viewers of Rome's wealth and engineering achievements. The buildings themselves become symbols of political power. They dwarf individual characters, emphasizing that even emperors are only temporary figures within a civilization that sees itself as eternal. Yet beneath this architectural grandeur lies another reality. Scott deliberately includes crowded alleyways, dirty streets, smoke-filled marketplaces, and aging structures alongside magnificent monuments. This mixture prevents Rome from feeling like an idealized postcard. It becomes a living city filled with both extraordinary beauty and everyday hardship. The Colosseum serves as the centerpiece of the film's world building. Although modern audiences immediately recognize it as one of history's greatest landmarks, Gladiator presents it not as a tourist attraction, but as the beating heart of Roman public life. When spectators enter the arena, the sheer scale becomes overwhelming. Tens of thousands of citizens gather to witness violent spectacles. Vendors sell food. Politicians observe the crowd. Senators discuss power. Ordinary citizens cheer, celebrate, and demand blood. The Colosseum becomes far more than an arena for combat. It functions as a political stage where emperors seek public approval and gladiators become symbols larger than themselves. The arena also operates according to its own social rules. Skill earns respect regardless of social status. A slave who survives impossible battles can become famous throughout Rome. Public opinion possesses enormous influence. Victory depends not only upon defeating opponents, but also upon winning the crowd's admiration. These unwritten rules create an entirely separate world existing within the larger empire. Another remarkable aspect of the film's world-building involves environmental storytelling. Rather than explaining society through dialogue, the filmmakers allow physical spaces to reveal information naturally. Gladiator is often described as a historical epic, but reducing the film to a single genre does not fully capture what makes it so compelling. One of the reasons the movie has remained relevant for more than 2 decades is that it successfully combines several genres into one seamless narrative. It borrows the emotional intensity of a revenge drama, the scale of an epic, the excitement of an action film, the political intrigue of a historical drama, the emotional weight of a tragedy, and even the spiritual qualities of a mythological tale. Rather than allowing one genre to dominate, Gladiator carefully blends these elements together, creating a film that appeals to a remarkably broad audience. Its primary genre is undoubtedly the historical epic. Historically, epic films are characterized by massive scale, large casts, elaborate costumes, impressive production design, sweeping cinematography, and stories involving civilizations, kingdoms, or empires. Gladiator embraces all of these characteristics while updating the genre for modern audiences. The film takes place during the Roman Empire, one of history's most influential civilizations. Instead of focusing on ordinary daily life, it presents events involving emperors, generals, senators, armies, and gladiators. The stakes extend beyond individual survival to include questions about the future of Rome itself. Massive battle sequences, enormous architectural recreations, and thousands of extras reinforce the feeling that viewers are witnessing history unfold on a grand scale. However, unlike many earlier historical epics, Gladiator avoids becoming emotionally distant. Classic epics from the 1950s and 1960s often emphasize spectacle over character, allowing audiences to admire historical settings without necessarily forming deep, emotional connections to the protagonists. Gladiator reverses this formula. Every major event is filtered through the personal experiences of Maximus. The fate of the empire matters because it directly affects one man's struggle for justice, making the historical scale feel emotionally intimate. Another major genre woven throughout the film is the revenge drama. At its heart, Gladiator follows one of storytelling's oldest and most recognizable narrative structures. A respected man loses everything through betrayal. His family is taken from him. His status is destroyed. Forced into suffering, he survives against overwhelming odds while seeking justice against the individual responsible for his pain. This revenge framework provides the emotional engine that drives the story forward. Audiences immediately understand Maximus' motivation because it is rooted in universal human emotions. Love for family, grief, betrayal, and the desire for justice transcend historical periods and cultural boundaries. Even viewers with little interest in Roman history can relate to these emotional experiences. Yet Gladiator also avoids many of the common cliches associated with revenge stories. Revenge is not portrayed as glamorous or emotionally satisfying. Throughout the film, Maximus remains haunted by loss. Every victory reminds him of what has already been taken from him. Instead of becoming consumed entirely by hatred, he continues to demonstrate compassion, loyalty, and humility. His pursuit of justice never completely erases his humanity. The action genre also plays a significant role in the film's identity. Gladiator contains numerous large-scale combat sequences, including military battles, gladiatorial contests, ambushes, executions, and duels. These scenes provide excitement and spectacle while maintaining narrative importance. Unlike many action films where combat exists primarily for entertainment, every fight in Gladiator serves character development. The opening battle establishes Maximus as an exceptional leader. The gladiatorial contests demonstrate his intelligence and adaptability rather than simple physical strength. Even smaller confrontations reveal emotional states, political tensions, or moral dilemmas. Ridley Scott deliberately rejected overly choreographed action common in earlier historical adventures. Combat appears exhausting, unpredictable, and brutally realistic. Soldiers struggle through mud. Gladiators fight desperately for survival. Victory depends as much upon strategy and teamwork as individual skill. This grounded approach influenced countless action films released in the years following Gladiator. Another important genre present throughout the movie is political drama. While audiences often remember Gladiator for its battles and arena fights, much of the story unfolds through conversations, conspiracies, and struggles for power within the Roman government. The conflict between the emperor, the Senate, military leaders, and influential citizens creates a complex political landscape. Characters constantly negotiate alliances, manipulate public opinion, and pursue competing visions for Rome's future. Questions of leadership, legitimacy, corruption, and responsibility become central themes. Unlike many political thrillers set in modern governments, Gladiator explores these issues through the lens of an ancient empire. Yet the underlying concerns remain surprisingly familiar. How should leaders obtain power? What responsibilities accompany authority? Can political systems survive when personal ambition outweighs public service? These timeless questions allow the political drama to resonate with contemporary audiences. The film also contains strong elements of tragedy. Classical tragedy traditionally follows a noble individual whose life is transformed by irreversible events, leading to profound suffering while exploring larger moral themes. Maximus embodies many characteristics associated with tragic heroes. At the beginning of the story, he possesses honor, military success, the respect of his soldiers, and the trust of the emperor. He appears destined for continued greatness. However, betrayal destroys this future almost instantly. His fall from power creates the emotional foundation for the rest of the narrative. Unlike conventional action heroes who become increasingly powerful throughout their stories, Maximus actually loses nearly everything before gradually rebuilding his sense of purpose. His journey emphasizes sacrifice rather than triumph, making the emotional experience closer to classical tragedy than simple adventure. Closely connected to tragedy is the film's exploration of mythology and legend. Although Gladiator is not a fantasy film, it frequently adopts storytelling techniques associated with myths and heroic legends. The opening 15 minutes of Gladiator are widely regarded as one of the strongest introductions in modern cinema. In a remarkably short amount of time, the film establishes its central character, introduces the political landscape, defines its visual style, presents its major themes, creates emotional investment, and immediately immerses the audience in the world of ancient Rome. Rather than relying on lengthy exposition or narration, director Ridley Scott allows images, performances, music, and carefully constructed scenes to communicate nearly everything the audience needs to understand. By the end of the opening sequence, viewers already know what kind of story they are about to experience, even though they cannot yet predict the extraordinary journey that lies ahead. The film begins with silence and simplicity rather than spectacle. Before armies clash or political conspiracies emerge, audiences see a close-up of a hand gently brushing across a field of golden wheat. The image is peaceful, warm, and filled with sunlight. A small bird flies through the air while soft music plays in the background. Nothing about this opening resembles the violent historical epic viewers might expect. This first image immediately introduces one of the film's most important symbols. The wheat field represents peace, family, home, and the life that Maximus truly values. Long before audiences fully understand who he is, the film quietly establishes what matters most to him. His deepest desire is not power, fame, or political influence. It is the simple life waiting for him beyond war. This opening also creates an emotional contrast that will echo throughout the entire movie. Peace exists in memory and dreams, while violence dominates reality. Every time Maximus later remembers the wheat fields, audiences are reminded of what has been stolen from him and what continues to motivate his actions. The peaceful imagery abruptly disappears as the film cuts to the cold forests of Germania. Instantly, the atmosphere changes. Instead of golden sunlight, viewers encounter gray skies, leafless trees, heavy fog, and soldiers preparing for battle. The shift is dramatic and intentional. Ridley Scott immediately communicates that Maximus lives between two worlds. One is defined by love and tranquility, while the other is consumed by war and duty. The forest itself becomes an active part of the storytelling. It feels dark, wet, and intimidating. Smoke drifts between the trees. Horses grow restless. Soldiers quietly sharpen weapons while awaiting orders. Rather than rushing into action, the film takes its time, allowing audiences to absorb the tension before battle begins. This patience is important because it creates anticipation. Viewers understand that conflict is inevitable, but they are invited to observe the discipline and professionalism of the Roman army before violence erupts. The first major character introduced is Maximus Decimus Meridius. Interestingly, the film does not introduce him through dramatic speeches or heroic declarations. Instead, he is shown walking calmly among his soldiers. He checks on his men, speaks respectfully to fellow officers, and displays quiet confidence. These early moments establish Maximus as a leader rather than merely a warrior. His authority comes not from fear, but from mutual respect. Soldiers trust him because he clearly cares about them. He knows their hardships, understands the dangers they face, and shares those risks personally. This leadership style immediately distinguishes him from many traditional action heroes. He does not seek attention or glory. Instead, he focuses entirely on completing his responsibilities while protecting those under his command. One particularly memorable moment occurs when Maximus notices a small bird flying through the trees. He pauses briefly to watch it before returning to military preparations. Although the scene lasts only a few seconds, it reveals an essential aspect of his personality. Even surrounded by the machinery of war, he remains connected to nature and capable of appreciating beauty. This subtle detail reinforces the opening image of the wheat field. Maximus is fundamentally a man of peace forced into violence by circumstance. War is his profession, not his identity. The audience is then introduced to Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Unlike Maximus, Marcus enters surrounded by the symbols of political authority. However, Scott deliberately portrays the emperor as elderly, tired, and reflective rather than overwhelmingly powerful. His conversations immediately reveal his wisdom and growing concern about the future of Rome. Marcus understands that military victories alone cannot guarantee the empire's survival. He worries about corruption, political decay, and the responsibilities of leadership. These scenes quietly establish one of the film's central themes. True leadership is measured not by power, but by service. Marcus and Maximus share this philosophy, creating an immediate emotional connection between them before the audience fully understands its significance. The film also introduces Commodus before the battle begins. His arrival contrasts sharply with Maximus' quiet professionalism. Commodus appears uncertain, emotionally restless, and eager for recognition. Even without explicit dialogue explaining his personality, Joaquin Phoenix's performance communicates deep insecurity. Small gestures become important. Commodus constantly seeks approval from his father. His expressions reveal jealousy whenever Marcus praises Maximus. Rather than portraying obvious villainy, the film introduces a deeply conflicted individual struggling with feelings of inadequacy. This approach makes the character far more compelling than a simple antagonist. Audiences sense emotional instability long before his later actions reveal its consequences. Another remarkable achievement of the opening sequence is how efficiently it establishes relationships. Within only a few scenes, viewers understand the mutual respect between Marcus Aurelius and Maximus, the tension between Marcus and Commodus, the loyalty of the Roman soldiers toward their general, and the emotional distance separating Commodus from his father. None of these relationships require lengthy explanations. They emerge naturally through conversations, body language, and visual composition. As preparations continue, Scott carefully builds suspense before the battle begins. Messengers arrive with reports. Commanders discuss strategy. Soldiers wait in disciplined silence. Archers prepare their positions. Cavalry units assemble. One of the defining reasons Gladiator remains such a powerful and enduring film is the way it constructs conflict on multiple levels simultaneously. Rather than relying on a single obstacle or a straightforward battle between good and evil, the movie layers personal, political, emotional, philosophical, and physical conflict together until every scene carries meaningful tension. As the story progresses, the audience is never concerned only with whether Maximus will survive his next fight. They are also invested in whether justice will prevail, whether Rome can be saved from corruption, whether honorable leadership can overcome tyranny, and whether a man who has lost everything can still find purpose. This layered approach makes Gladiator much more than an action film. Every conflict reinforces another, creating a narrative where personal struggles affect political events. Political decisions influence emotional relationships, and emotional wounds shape every choice the characters make. By connecting these conflicts so tightly, the film ensures that every victory and every setback feels significant. The central external conflict begins with the struggle between Maximus and Commodus. On the surface, this appears to be a classic battle between hero and villain. Maximus represents honor, loyalty, discipline, and selflessness, while Commodus embodies ambition, insecurity, manipulation, and absolute power. However, the conflict is more complicated than a simple desire for revenge. Maximus is not merely fighting one man. He is fighting an entire system that allows corrupt leadership to flourish. Commodus controls the empire, commands its armies, influences the Senate, and possesses the legal authority to eliminate anyone who threatens his rule. This imbalance creates enormous dramatic tension because Maximus cannot simply challenge the emperor directly. Instead, he must slowly rebuild his influence from the lowest possible position. He begins as a slave with no rights, no wealth, no political allies, and no freedom. Every step toward confronting Commodus requires overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. This gradual climb significantly raises the stakes. If Maximus had retained his position as a Roman general, the conflict would have been much simpler. By stripping him of everything, the film transforms every achievement into a hard-earned victory. At the same time, the story introduces a deeply personal internal conflict. Although Maximus survives physically, his emotional world has been completely destroyed. The murder of his wife and son leaves him psychologically shattered. His greatest motivation throughout the film is not ambition or political power, but overwhelming grief. This internal conflict distinguishes him from many traditional action heroes. He does not seek revenge because he enjoys violence. In fact, the opposite is true. Every battle reminds him of the peaceful life he has lost. The audience constantly senses that Maximus would gladly abandon combat forever if it meant returning to his family. His emotional struggle, therefore, becomes one of identity. Before the tragedy, he knew exactly who he was. He was a respected general, a devoted husband, a loving father, and a trusted servant of Rome. Afterward, all of those identities disappear. He is no longer a commander. He is no longer a free man. He is no longer a husband. He is no longer a father. He is simply another slave forced to fight for entertainment. The remainder of the film explores whether he can rediscover meaning despite losing every part of the life that once defined him. This search for identity creates an emotional conflict that runs parallel to the external story. Even when Maximus wins battles, his internal wounds remain unresolved. Victory alone cannot heal grief. Another important layer of conflict exists within Commodus himself. Unlike purely evil villains who act without emotional complexity, Commodus constantly struggles against his own insecurities. He desperately craves approval. He longs for the love of his father. He fears comparison with Maximus. He doubts his own ability to rule. These psychological weaknesses drive many of his decisions. Rather than feeling secure after becoming emperor, Commodus becomes increasingly paranoid. Every successful gladiator, every senator who hesitates, every cheering crowd becomes another potential threat to his authority. This insecurity transforms him into his own worst enemy. Ironically, Commodus possesses nearly unlimited political power, yet he feels powerless emotionally. Maximus possesses almost no political power, yet his emotional strength allows him to inspire everyone around him. This reversal creates fascinating dramatic tension because the audience recognizes that true leadership depends upon character rather than official titles. The political conflict within Rome further expands the story's stakes. Marcus Aurelius dreams of restoring authority to the Senate and returning Rome to the principles upon which it was originally founded. Commodus rejects this vision entirely, preferring absolute imperial control. The Senate finds itself trapped between these competing philosophies. Some senators remain loyal to Rome's republican traditions. Others fear opposing the emperor. Many simply struggle to survive politically. This political uncertainty creates suspense because viewers understand that Rome's future depends upon decisions occurring far beyond the gladiator arena. The conflict, therefore, extends from individual revenge to questions about the fate of an entire civilization. Another major source of tension comes from a gladiatorial system itself. Every arena battle functions as both an immediate physical challenge and a larger symbolic conflict. On one level, Maximus must survive opponents who are often stronger, more experienced, or placed in advantageous situations. On another level, he must preserve his dignity within an institution specifically designed to strip away human identity. Gladiators exist as property. They fight because others demand entertainment. Their lives are bought and sold. Their deaths become public spectacle. The conflict is therefore not only about physical survival, but also about maintaining humanity under dehumanizing circumstances. This idea appears repeatedly throughout the film. Maximus refuses to surrender his moral principles despite becoming a slave. He protects fellow gladiators. He leads rather than dominates. He earns loyalty through respect rather than fear. One of the greatest strengths of Gladiator is that its conflict does not rely on a single villain standing in the hero's way. Although Commodus is unquestionably the film's primary antagonist, the story surrounds Maximus with multiple opposing forces that challenge him physically, emotionally, politically, and morally. This layered approach gives the narrative remarkable depth because Maximus is not simply fighting one corrupt emperor. He is battling grief, tyranny, slavery, fate, political corruption, public spectacle, and the darker aspects of human nature itself. Every obstacle contributes to his journey, making the antagonistic forces of Gladiator far more complex than those found in many traditional action films. At the center of these forces stands Commodus, one of the most memorable villains in modern cinema. Unlike many cinematic antagonists who seek wealth, conquest, or simple destruction, Commodus is driven primarily by emotional insecurity. His desire for absolute power is not rooted in confidence, but in deep personal weakness. This psychological foundation makes him both fascinating and unsettling because his actions arise from recognizable human emotions that have been allowed to grow into dangerous obsession. From his very first appearance, Commodus is portrayed as a man desperate for approval. He constantly seeks validation from his father, Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Every conversation between them reveals an emotional imbalance. Commodus speaks with hope, anxiety, and vulnerability, while Marcus responds with disappointment and emotional distance. Even before any betrayal occurs, the audience understands that Commodus carries years of unresolved resentment. This father-son relationship is essential to understanding his motivations. Commodus does not simply want the throne. More than anything, he wants to hear his father express pride in him. He wants recognition. He wants love. When Marcus instead places his trust in Maximus, Commodus interprets the decision not merely as a political choice, but as the ultimate personal rejection. This emotional wound becomes the catalyst for everything that follows. Unlike villains motivated solely by greed or conquest, Commodus believes that taking power will finally satisfy the emotional emptiness inside him. However, once he becomes emperor, he quickly discovers that political authority cannot erase lifelong insecurity. Instead, every new responsibility increases his fear of failure. One of Joaquin Phoenix's greatest achievements is portraying Commodus as emotionally fragile rather than physically intimidating. He rarely dominates scenes through strength. Instead, he manipulates conversations, seeks sympathy, lashes out unpredictably, and constantly watches others for signs of disloyalty. This insecurity makes him dangerous because he cannot tolerate uncertainty. Every disagreement feels like betrayal. Every criticism becomes a threat. Every successful individual becomes a rival. His paranoia gradually transforms into tyranny. As emperor, Commodus surrounds himself with symbols of authority, magnificent architecture, luxurious clothing, guards, ceremonies, and elaborate public appearances. Yet these displays only emphasize his emotional weakness. The more power he accumulates externally, the more unstable he becomes internally. This contrast creates one of the film's central ironies. Maximus loses everything yet grows stronger. Commodus gains everything yet becomes weaker. Their journeys move in opposite directions. The film also presents Commodus as a master manipulator. Rather than solving problems through wisdom or military leadership, he relies on intimidation, deception, and psychological pressure. He manipulates senators through fear. He manipulates the public through spectacle. He manipulates his own family through emotional dependency. He manipulates soldiers through political authority. Unlike Maximus, who earns loyalty through respect, Commodus demands obedience through control. This difference highlights one of Gladiator's recurring themes. Leadership built upon fear ultimately destroys itself. Another defining aspect of Commodus is his obsession with image. He desperately wants to be remembered as a great emperor, but he lacks the qualities necessary to achieve genuine greatness. As a result, he attempts to manufacture admiration. He stages public appearances. He participates in carefully controlled gladiatorial exhibitions. He surrounds himself with symbols of military glory despite lacking battlefield experience. He constantly seeks applause from the Roman people. Yet every performance feels artificial because audiences instinctively recognize the difference between authentic leadership and theatrical display. This obsession with public perception explains why Maximus becomes such a threat. Maximus never seeks fame. He earns it naturally. The people admire him not because he demands recognition, but because his actions consistently demonstrate courage, humility, and honor. Every cheer from Maximus becomes another reminder of Commodus' inadequacy. The emperor therefore begins viewing public admiration itself as an enemy. This psychological conflict elevates the story far beyond a simple revenge narrative. Interestingly, Commodus rarely underestimates Maximus. Many cinematic villains dismiss their opponents until it is too late. Commodus recognizes Maximus' danger almost immediately. He understands that Maximus possesses qualities he himself lacks. military respect, personal integrity, public admiration, moral authority. This awareness makes Commodus even more desperate. His increasingly reckless decisions emerge from fear rather than arrogance. Beyond Commodus, Gladiator presents the Roman political system as another major antagonistic force. The empire itself has become deeply corrupted. Power depends upon influence rather than justice. Political survival often requires compromise instead of principle. Many senators recognize Commodus' flaws, but hesitate to oppose him openly because doing so could mean imprisonment or death. This institutional corruption creates obstacles that no individual duel can resolve. Even if Commodus disappeared, the larger political system would remain damaged. The film therefore suggests that tyranny grows not only through cruel rulers, but also through the silence of those unwilling to resist them. Another important antagonistic force is slavery. After Maximus loses his status, he enters a world where human beings are treated as property. Slave traders evaluate people like livestock. One of the primary reasons Gladiator has endured as one of the greatest films ever made is that its narrative follows a timeless storytelling pattern while adapting it to fit a darker, more mature, and emotionally complex world. Although the film is set within the Roman Empire, its structure resembles myths and legends that have existed for thousands of years. At its core, Gladiator tells the story of a hero who loses everything, descends into suffering, transforms through hardship, and ultimately fulfills a destiny greater than personal revenge. This structure closely aligns with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, while also fitting remarkably well into the three-act structure and many elements of Blake Snyder's Save the Cat storytelling model. By combining these frameworks, the film creates a journey that feels both ancient and universally relatable. The hero's journey begins with what Campbell called the ordinary world. In Gladiator, Maximus' ordinary world is not peaceful domestic life, but his role as Rome's greatest general. This distinction is important because, unlike many heroes who begin as ordinary people, Maximus begins at the peak of his profession. He commands the loyalty of thousands of soldiers, enjoys the complete trust of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and has earned a reputation as one of Rome's finest military leaders. However, despite his accomplishments, the audience quickly learns that Maximus does not define himself through military success. His true ordinary world exists in his memories of home. Throughout the opening scenes, he speaks about returning to his farm in Spain, reuniting with his wife and son, and leaving warfare behind forever. The recurring image of the wheat fields symbolizes the life he genuinely desires. This emotional foundation is essential because it establishes that Maximus values peace more than glory. The call to adventure arrives when Emperor Marcus Aurelius privately reveals his intentions for Rome. Rather than allowing Commodus to inherit the throne, Marcus asks Maximus to serve as protector of Rome until power can eventually be returned to the Senate. This moment changes everything. Maximus is no longer simply a military commander. He is asked to safeguard the future of an entire civilization. Interestingly, Maximus does not seek this responsibility. He wants only to return home. Like many heroes in classical mythology, the adventure finds him rather than the other way around. His reluctance makes him more compelling because he accepts responsibility out of duty instead of ambition. The stage known as refusal of the call appears in a subtle form. Maximus does not openly reject Marcus Aurelius, but his hesitation reveals that he never wanted political power. He repeatedly expresses his desire to leave military life behind. This reluctance demonstrates one of his defining qualities. Unlike Commodus, who craves authority, Maximus accepts leadership only when it serves others. Before he can fully embrace this new role, tragedy strikes. Commodus murders his father, seizes the throne, and orders Maximus' execution. This violent disruption forces the hero into a journey he never intended to take. The meeting with the mentor traditionally provides heroes with wisdom before their greatest challenges. In Gladiator, Marcus Aurelius fulfills this role. Although his screen time is relatively brief, his influence shapes every decision Maximus makes afterward. Marcus represents ideal leadership, humility, and service. His belief that Rome can become something better remains with Maximus throughout the story. Even after Marcus dies, his philosophy continues guiding the hero. Maximus does not pursue revenge simply because he hates Commodus. He also fights to honor Marcus' dream of restoring justice to Rome. The mentor's lessons therefore continue influencing the narrative long after his physical presence disappears. The crossing of the first threshold occurs when Maximus survives his execution and discovers that his wife and son have been murdered. This moment permanently separates him from his former life. There is no possibility of returning to the world introduced at the beginning of the film. The hero loses his family. He loses his home. He loses his rank. He loses his freedom. He even loses his identity. Everything familiar disappears. This irreversible transformation marks the true beginning of his journey. Soon afterward, Maximus collapses from exhaustion and is captured by slave traders. At this point, he enters what Campbell described as the special world, a place governed by entirely different rules than the ordinary world. Instead of commanding armies, he becomes property. Instead of receiving respect, he receives orders. Instead of protecting others, he must fight simply to survive. This dramatic reversal forces the hero to rebuild himself from nothing. The stage known as tests, allies, and enemies occupies much of the film's middle section. Maximus faces constant physical and emotional challenges while gradually forming new relationships. His fellow gladiators become unexpected allies. Juba offers friendship, wisdom, and spiritual support. Hagen and the other gladiators eventually respect his leadership. Proximo, despite initially viewing him as valuable property, begins recognizing something extraordinary within him. Each relationship teaches Maximus something different. Juba reminds him of faith and hope. Proximo teaches him how to survive inside the arena. The gladiators demonstrate that loyalty can exist even in the harshest environments. These friendships prevent the hero from becoming consumed entirely by grief. At the same time, new enemies constantly emerge. The gladiatorial system exploits him. Slave traders profit from his suffering. Arena opponents threaten his life. Commodus consolidates political power. The hero faces danger from every direction. Importantly, these challenges do not simply test Maximus' physical abilities. They test his character. Will he become cruel? Will he abandon hope? Will he sacrifice others to save himself? Again and again, he chooses honor over selfishness. The approach to the inmost cave begins when Maximus is brought to Rome itself. Returning to the capital forces him to confront the source of his suffering. The city now represents everything he has lost. Rome contains his enemy. Rome contains political corruption. Rome contains the arena where he must fight. Yet Rome also contains the possibility of justice. This duality creates enormous psychological tension. One of the most remarkable achievements of Gladiator is that it arrived at a pivotal moment in film history, when traditional filmmaking techniques were beginning to merge with rapidly advancing digital technology. Released in the year 2000, the film became a perfect example of how practical effects and computer-generated imagery could work together rather than compete against one another. Instead of relying entirely on digital environments or completely avoiding new technology, director Ridley Scott chose a balanced approach. This philosophy allowed Gladiator to create one of the most convincing cinematic versions of ancient Rome ever seen, while maintaining the realism and emotional weight that practical filmmaking naturally provides. Today, audiences are accustomed to historical worlds built almost entirely inside computers. Massive cities, armies, and landscapes can be created digitally with remarkable detail. However, when Gladiator entered production, these technologies were still developing. Computer-generated imagery had made enormous progress during the 1990s through films like Jurassic Park and The Matrix. But creating an entire Roman Empire remained an extraordinary technical challenge. Rather than treating technology as a spectacle in itself, Scott insisted that every visual effect should serve the story. The audience was never supposed to notice where practical filmmaking ended and digital enhancement began. The ultimate goal was immersion. If viewers became distracted by obvious visual effects, then the technology had failed. This philosophy influenced every department involved in the production. Perhaps the most famous technological achievement in Gladiator is the recreation of ancient Rome. The real city of Rome still contains remarkable historical ruins, but modern buildings surround these ancient structures, making it impossible to film scenes that accurately represent the city as it appeared nearly 2,000 years ago. The production team therefore faced an enormous challenge. They needed to convince audiences they were seeing one of the greatest cities in human history. Building the entire city physically would have been financially impossible. Creating everything digitally would have appeared artificial, especially with the technology available at the time. The solution combined both approaches. Large physical sets were constructed for the areas where actors directly interacted with their environment. These included streets, palace interiors, market spaces, gladiator training grounds, and portions of the Colosseum. Digital artists then extended these practical sets into the distance, adding additional buildings, monuments, temples, roads, and crowds that seamlessly blended with the physical construction. As a result, Rome feels enormous without ever appearing obviously computer-generated. One of the film's greatest technical accomplishments was recreating the Colosseum. Only part of the original structure still survives today, and it has changed dramatically over centuries of history. The filmmakers wanted audiences to experience the arena during its peak, when tens of thousands of spectators gathered to witness gladiatorial combat. To achieve this, only the lower sections of the Colosseum were physically built. The production team constructed approximately one-third of the arena, including the main entrance, sections of seating, portions of the arena floor, tunnels, gates, and surrounding architecture. Everything above these physical structures was digitally created. Computer artists added the upper levels of the stadium, towering walls, decorative statues, banners, and massive crowds stretching into the distance. Because actors interacted with real, physical environments, the digital additions felt convincing rather than detached. Even today, many viewers are surprised to learn how much of the Colosseum was created through visual effects. Another major technological achievement involved digital crowd replication. The actual production could only employ a limited number of extras inside the arena. Yet the real Colosseum often held more than 50,000 spectators. To recreate this scale, filmmakers used digital duplication techniques. Groups of real extras were filmed repeatedly in different seating sections. These recordings were then combined digitally, creating the illusion of tens of thousands of unique spectators. Individual crowd members cheered, stood, waved, reacted, and celebrated independently, preventing the audience from noticing repetitive patterns. Although modern crowd simulation software has become far more sophisticated, Gladiator demonstrated how effective these techniques could be when used carefully. The opening battle of Germania also showcased an impressive combination of practical and digital effects. Ridley Scott believed battle scenes should feel physically authentic. Real horses charged across muddy fields. Hundreds of extras performed combat choreography. Practical explosions ignited forests. Flaming arrows were launched. Smoke filled the environment naturally. However, digital technology enhanced these practical elements. Additional soldiers extended the size of the Roman army. Computer-generated arrows increased the scale of attacks. Digital fire expanded practical flames. Background landscapes were extended to create the impression of an enormous battlefield stretching far beyond the physical filming location. The audience experiences the battle as massive because practical action and digital enhancement work together invisibly. One of Scott's greatest strengths as a director has always been his preference for practical environments whenever possible. He believes actors deliver more convincing performances when surrounded by real locations instead of empty green screens. As a result, Gladiator contains an extraordinary amount of practical craftsmanship. Thousands of handmade props were produced. Armor was individually constructed. Weapons were carefully designed. Military camps were physically built. Gladiator schools were fully realized. Marketplaces overflowed with practical goods rather than digital replacements. These tangible environments allowed actors to interact naturally with the world around them. Costume design also represented a remarkable technical achievement. More than 10,000 costume pieces were created for the production. Roman soldiers required highly detailed armor reflecting historical inspiration while still allowing performers to move safely during battle. One of the defining reasons Gladiator continues to be regarded as one of the greatest films ever made is its extraordinary emotional impact. While many historical epics are remembered primarily for their grand battles, impressive visual effects, or large-scale production, Gladiator is remembered because it makes audiences feel deeply connected to its characters. Nearly every major scene is designed not only to move the story forward, but also to evoke powerful emotional responses. Viewers experience hope, grief, triumph, fear, admiration, anger, sorrow, and ultimately catharsis. These emotions are carefully layered throughout the film, creating an experience that remains just as powerful today as it was when audiences first saw it in theaters. One of the film's greatest strengths is that it establishes an emotional foundation before introducing its central conflict. During the opening scenes, the audience quickly learns that Maximus is not driven by ambition or political dreams. His greatest desire is simply to return home to his wife, his son, and his farm in Spain. The recurring images of the wheat fields immediately create a sense of peace and warmth. Although viewers know almost nothing about his family at this point, these brief moments are enough to establish what matters most to him. This early emotional investment is essential because it transforms everything that follows. The audience is not merely watching a respected Roman general. They are watching a husband and father whose greatest happiness exists far away from the battlefield. His dreams are surprisingly ordinary. He wants to go home. That simplicity makes him instantly relatable. The relationship between Maximus and Marcus Aurelius also creates emotional depth early in the story. Marcus does not treat Maximus as merely another military commander. Instead, he recognizes his integrity, humility, and sense of duty. Their conversations are filled with mutual respect rather than political calculation. The audience senses that Marcus sees Maximus almost as the son he wishes he had. This emotional connection becomes especially meaningful because it contrasts sharply with Marcus' relationship with Commodus. Where Maximus earns respect naturally, Commodus desperately seeks affection but never truly receives it. These parallel relationships establish emotional tension long before the major tragedy unfolds. Perhaps the first truly devastating emotional moment occurs when Commodus murders Marcus Aurelius. What makes this scene so effective is not its violence, but its psychological complexity. Commodus does not kill his father in a fit of uncontrollable rage. Instead, he embraces him, speaks with heartbreaking vulnerability, and then suffocates him while expressing years of emotional pain. For a brief moment, the audience almost pities Commodus. His desperate need for love feels painfully human. Then, as he commits the unforgivable act of murdering his own father, sympathy transforms into horror. This emotional reversal demonstrates the film's remarkable ability to present morally complex characters rather than simple heroes and villains. The emotional intensity rises dramatically when Maximus is arrested and sentenced to execution. Until this point, viewers still hope that justice may somehow prevail. Instead, everything begins collapsing with shocking speed. Marcus Aurelius is dead. Commodus becomes emperor. Maximus is declared a traitor. His loyal soldiers are powerless. His future disappears almost instantly. The audience experiences this collapse alongside Maximus, making his helplessness deeply affecting. However, the single most emotionally devastating sequence in Gladiator is unquestionably the discovery of Maximus' murdered wife and son. Ridley Scott handles this moment with remarkable restraint. Instead of emphasizing graphic violence, he focuses on Maximus' desperate journey home, his growing fear, and finally the unbearable silence that follows his discovery. The emotional power of the scene comes from what it represents rather than what it shows. The audience understands that every dream introduced during the opening minutes has been permanently destroyed. His family is gone. His home no longer exists as a place of happiness. The peaceful future he longed for has become impossible. Russell Crowe's performance during these scenes is extraordinarily understated. He does not deliver dramatic speeches or display exaggerated emotion. His grief appears almost overwhelming in its quietness. The audience witnesses a man whose emotional world has completely collapsed. This restraint makes the tragedy feel authentic. Many viewers describe this sequence as the moment they became completely emotionally invested in the story. From this point forward, Maximus is no longer simply seeking revenge. He is carrying unimaginable grief. Another reason the film resonates so deeply is its exploration of friendship. After losing his family, Maximus slowly begins forming new relationships with the gladiators around him. Initially, he isolates himself emotionally. He speaks very little. He avoids unnecessary conversation. He expects nothing except survival. Gradually, however, characters such as Juba begin breaking through his emotional barriers. Juba provides one of the film's most compassionate presences. His calm wisdom, spiritual beliefs, and quiet kindness remind Maximus that life still possesses meaning even after unbearable loss. Their friendship becomes one of the emotional anchors of the film. Unlike many cinematic friendships built through humor alone, this relationship develops through shared suffering. Neither man pretends life is easy. Instead, they help each other endure. The Gladiator training school also becomes emotionally significant because it represents unexpected family. These men come from different cultures, backgrounds, and experiences. Many were once enemies. Some were slaves. Others were prisoners of war. Yet inside the arena, they discover solidarity. Their growing loyalty toward one another creates genuine warmth within an otherwise brutal environment. This reminds audiences that human connection can survive even under the harshest circumstances. One of the most emotionally satisfying moments occurs when Maximus begins leading the gladiators during combat. Instead of fighting selfishly, he organizes them into disciplined military formations. Working together, they achieve victories that seem impossible. The audience experiences not only excitement, but also inspiration. These scenes celebrate cooperation rather than individual heroics. One of the most interesting aspects of Gladiator is that many people assume it is based on a true story or adapted from an existing novel. This belief is understandable because the film contains real Roman emperors, authentic historical locations, and numerous references to actual events from Roman history. However, Gladiator occupies a unique position among historical films. It is neither a direct adaptation of one specific source, nor a completely original invention. Instead, it is a carefully crafted blend of historical fact, fictional storytelling, ancient history, classical literature, and creative inspiration. The filmmakers borrowed ideas from multiple historical sources, combined them with an original narrative, and reshaped real events into a dramatic story designed to explore universal themes such as honor, corruption, justice, sacrifice, and the abuse of power. Unlike films adapted directly from a novel or a historical biography, Gladiator was created from an original screenplay written by David Franzoni. However, Franzoni did not begin with a completely blank page. His writing drew inspiration from centuries of Roman history, archaeological research, historical writings, and one particularly influential nonfiction book about gladiatorial combat. One of the most significant sources of inspiration was a historical work exploring the lives of Roman gladiators and the brutal entertainment culture that surrounded them. This research introduced the filmmakers to the reality of gladiatorial schools, the political importance of public games, and the enormous influence that spectacles held over Roman society. Rather than adapting specific stories from this historical material, the filmmakers used it to establish the atmosphere of the world. They wanted audiences to understand that gladiatorial combat was not simply sport or entertainment. It was a political institution capable of shaping public opinion and strengthening imperial authority. This historical foundation allowed the fictional story to feel believable despite taking considerable creative liberties. The most obvious adaptation decision involved the protagonist himself. Maximus Decimus Meridius did not exist in recorded Roman history. He is an entirely fictional character created specifically for the film. However, Maximus was designed using qualities borrowed from several historical Roman military leaders. Throughout Roman history, numerous generals earned extraordinary loyalty from their soldiers, demonstrated exceptional leadership, and became influential political figures. Rather than copying one individual exactly, the screenplay combines characteristics from several historical commanders into a single fictional hero. This creative decision offered enormous advantages. If Maximus had been based entirely on one historical figure, the screenplay would have been limited by documented events. Creating an original character allowed the filmmakers greater freedom to construct an emotionally satisfying narrative while still placing him naturally within authentic historical circumstances. The film also includes Emperor Marcus Aurelius, one of Rome's most respected historical rulers. Historically, Marcus Aurelius was known as a philosopher emperor whose writings continue to influence readers today. He emphasized wisdom, self-discipline, humility, and moral responsibility. These qualities are reflected accurately in the film. However, significant changes were made to his final years. In Gladiator, Marcus decides not to leave the empire to his son Commodus. Instead, he intends to entrust Rome temporarily to Maximus until political authority can be restored to the Senate. Historically, this never happened. Marcus Aurelius officially named Commodus his successor years before his death. There is no historical evidence suggesting he planned to replace him with a military general. This change dramatically strengthens the emotional conflict. By having Marcus choose Maximus, the screenplay creates the central motivation for Commodus' betrayal. The audience understands why Commodus feels rejected, even though his response becomes monstrous. Without this adaptation, the emotional foundation of the story would be much weaker. The portrayal of Commodus also mixes historical reality with dramatic invention. Historically, Commodus did become Roman emperor after Marcus Aurelius. He ruled during a period marked by political instability and growing dissatisfaction. Ancient historians often described him as vain, unpredictable, and fascinated by gladiatorial combat. These aspects of his personality appear prominently in the film. However, many details differ substantially. In reality, Commodus did not murder Marcus Aurelius. Most historians believe Marcus died from illness during a military campaign. Likewise, Commodus was not killed in a public duel inside the Colosseum. Instead, historical records suggest he was assassinated as part of a political conspiracy involving members of his inner circle. By replacing assassination with direct combat against Maximus, the filmmakers create a far more emotionally satisfying climax. The duel symbolizes justice in a way that historical reality could not. The audience witnesses the hero confronting the source of his suffering face to face. This dramatic resolution reflects storytelling needs rather than historical accuracy. Lucilla also represents an interesting adaptation. She was a real historical figure and the daughter of Marcus Aurelius. Historically, Lucilla did participate in political conspiracies against Commodus. However, many aspects of her relationship with Maximus are fictional. There is no evidence suggesting she shared a romantic past with a military general resembling Maximus. The screenplay introduces this relationship primarily to deepen the emotional complexity of the political conflict. Lucilla becomes more than a senator's daughter. She becomes someone torn between personal feelings, family loyalty, and responsibility toward Rome. This emotional triangle adds richness to the story without significantly altering its larger themes. The Roman Senate receives similar treatment. The institution itself certainly existed and played a crucial role in Roman government. However, Gladiator simplifies many political processes. Real Roman politics involved complicated legal systems, shifting alliances, military influence, and regional administration extending across vast territories. One of the reasons Gladiator continues to reward repeat viewings more than 2 decades after its release is the incredible amount of subtle detail hidden throughout the film. While casual audiences often remember the spectacular battles, memorable dialogue, and emotional ending, viewers who return to the movie multiple times begin noticing layers of visual storytelling, symbolism, historical references, foreshadowing, recurring imagery, and carefully placed character moments that quietly enrich the experience. Ridley Scott is known for constructing films filled with small details that reveal themselves gradually, and Gladiator is no exception. Almost every frame contains choices that support the themes of honor, mortality, leadership, family, and the passage of time. Many of these details are never directly explained, allowing audiences to discover new meanings with every viewing. One of the most recognizable recurring visual details is the wheat field. At first glance, these scenes appear to be simple memories of Maximus' home. The audience sees him gently brushing his fingers across the tops of the wheat as he walks toward his family. These images are peaceful and comforting, standing in complete contrast to the violence of the Roman world. However, the wheat field serves a much deeper symbolic purpose. Each time it appears, its meaning evolves. At the beginning of the film, it represents hope. Maximus dreams of returning home after the war. Later, after his family is murdered, the wheat becomes a symbol of loss. It reminds him of everything that has been taken away. Near the end of the story, the wheat field transforms once again. Instead of representing memories, it becomes a vision of reunion. It symbolizes the peaceful afterlife where Maximus believes he will eventually meet his wife and son again. Without changing visually, the same image quietly reflects the emotional journey of the protagonist. This subtle evolution is one of the film's most beautiful storytelling devices. Another recurring detail involves Maximus touching the small figurines representing his family. Throughout the movie, he carries tiny carved figures of his wife and son. Whenever possible, he places them carefully in the ground before battles. Many viewers simply see these moments as personal rituals. In reality, they reveal how Maximus maintains his identity. Although Rome has taken his rank, his freedom, and nearly everything else, no one can take away his love for his family. The figurines become portable reminders of the life he refuses to forget. Their repeated appearance reinforces the idea that memory itself becomes an act of resistance against tyranny. Similarly, Maximus often rubs dirt between his fingers before entering combat. This gesture initially appears to be nothing more than a practical habit. Some viewers assume he is improving his grip. Others interpret it as nervous preparation. Yet the action carries symbolic meaning. Throughout the film, Earth represents home, his farm, his family, his roots. By touching the ground before battle, Maximus reconnects himself to the peaceful life he lost. Even inside the Colosseum, surrounded by violence and blood, he reminds himself who he truly is. This small gesture appears repeatedly, but is never explained through dialogue. Ridley Scott trusts audiences to discover its meaning on their own. The opening battle in Germania contains several examples of visual foreshadowing. Before combat begins, Maximus studies a small bird flying freely above the battlefield. The image lasts only a moment. On a first viewing, it seems like simple scenery. Later, however, birds repeatedly become associated with freedom and spiritual release. As Maximus spends much of the story imprisoned as a slave, the contrast between flight and captivity grows increasingly meaningful. The bird quietly predicts the hero's lifelong desire to return home, both physically and spiritually. Another fascinating detail occurs during Marcus Aurelius' conversations with Maximus. The emperor repeatedly speaks about Rome as an idea rather than merely a city. Many viewers focus primarily on the political implications of these discussions. Yet visually, Marcus is often framed with open spaces or natural surroundings. Commodus, by contrast, frequently appears surrounded by walls, shadows, columns, and enclosed architecture. These compositions subtly reinforce their personalities. Marcus represents openness and philosophical vision. Commodus represents confinement, insecurity, and obsession with control. The audience absorbs these visual differences almost unconsciously. The film also uses armor to communicate character development. At the beginning, Maximus wears polished Roman military armor reflecting discipline, authority, and honor. After becoming a gladiator, his equipment becomes rougher, damaged, and assembled from different pieces. However, despite these changes, he continues wearing elements that resemble his original military appearance whenever possible. This continuity reminds viewers that beneath the armor of a gladiator remains the Roman general. Commodus' costumes evolve differently. As his paranoia grows, his clothing becomes increasingly elaborate. More decorations, more luxurious fabrics, greater displays of wealth. Ironically, the more insecure he becomes, the more extravagant his appearance grows. His costumes function almost like armor protecting emotional weakness. One of the film's cleverest pieces of foreshadowing occurs during Marcus Aurelius' final conversation with Commodus. Marcus tells his son that he lacks the moral qualities necessary to lead Rome. Commodus responds emotionally, desperately seeking approval. The audience witnesses the beginning of his psychological collapse. Importantly, Marcus never insults Commodus' intelligence or military ability. Instead, he focuses entirely on character. This distinction foreshadows the central conflict. The struggle for Rome will ultimately be decided not by strength but by integrity. The Colosseum itself contains numerous symbolic details. As Maximus rises through the gladiatorial ranks, his position within the arena changes. Initially, he fights surrounded by chaos, dust, and confusion. Later, he stands confidently in the center while others follow his leadership. The physical geography reflects his emotional transformation. He no longer reacts to events. He shapes them. The arena becomes both literal battlefield and symbolic stage, where moral authority gradually shifts away from the emperor. Another subtle visual pattern involves light and darkness. When Gladiator was released in 2000, few people expected it to become one of the defining cinematic successes of its era. Historical epics had largely disappeared from Hollywood during the previous decades, and many industry observers questioned whether audiences still had an appetite for large-scale stories set in the ancient world. The production itself was expensive, technically ambitious, and creatively risky. It featured massive battle sequences, enormous practical sets, groundbreaking visual effects, thousands of costumes, and a story centered around Roman history rather than a proven modern franchise. There was no guarantee that audiences would embrace such an ambitious project. Instead, Gladiator exceeded expectations in nearly every measurable way, becoming both a critical triumph and a major commercial success that reshaped Hollywood's attitude toward historical filmmaking. At the time of its production, Gladiator carried an estimated budget of approximately $103 million. In the year 2000, this represented an enormous financial investment. Only the biggest studio productions received budgets of this size, and every decision had to justify the considerable expense. Unlike contemporary superhero films, where computer-generated imagery dominates production costs, Gladiator invested heavily across multiple departments. The film required extensive location shooting. Large practical sets had to be built. Thousands of handmade costumes were produced. Hundreds of horses and trained animals were employed. Massive battle scenes involve hundreds of extras. Visual effects teams worked to digitally recreate ancient Rome. International filming schedules added further complexity. These combined expenses made Gladiator one of the most ambitious productions of its time. Universal Pictures and DreamWorks shared responsibility for financing and distributing the project. This partnership helped reduce financial risk because the production costs and marketing expenses could be divided between two major studios. Even with shared investment, however, Gladiator remained a substantial gamble. Historical epics presented unique commercial challenges. Unlike science fiction or fantasy, they lacked built-in franchise audiences. Unlike romantic comedies, they appealed to a broader but less predictable demographic. Unlike children's animation, they targeted primarily adult viewers. The studios therefore needed Gladiator to attract audiences far beyond history enthusiasts. Marketing focused heavily on spectacle while simultaneously emphasizing the emotional journey of Maximus. The trailers showcased enormous battles. The Colosseum, gladiator combat, political intrigue, Russell Crowe's commanding performance, Hans Zimmer's powerful music. Rather than presenting the film as an educational historical drama, advertisers positioned it as an exciting action epic with emotional depth. This strategy proved highly effective because it appealed to multiple audience groups simultaneously. Action fans anticipated spectacular battles. Drama audiences recognized the emotional story. History enthusiasts appreciated the Roman setting. General moviegoers saw an inspiring tale of courage and revenge. Upon release, Gladiator opened strongly at the box office. Positive audience reactions spread quickly through word of mouth. Many viewers returned for repeat screenings. Unlike films that experience rapid declines after opening weekend, Gladiator demonstrated impressive staying power. Its emotional storytelling encouraged recommendations between friends and family. Critical praise further strengthened audience interest. As the weeks passed, the film continued attracting viewers who had initially been uncertain about watching a historical epic. By the end of its theatrical run, Gladiator had earned approximately $465 million worldwide. Considering its production budget, this represented an outstanding financial achievement. The film earned more than 4 times its reported production cost before additional revenue sources were even considered. After accounting for theatrical revenue, home video sales, television licensing, merchandising, and other distribution agreements, Gladiator became an extremely profitable investment for everyone involved. The domestic market contributed significantly to the film's success. Audiences in North America responded enthusiastically to the combination of emotional storytelling and spectacular action. Russell Crowe's growing popularity also helped attract moviegoers. His portrayal of Maximus quickly became one of the defining performances of his career. International markets proved equally important. Gladiator performed exceptionally well across Europe, where Roman history remains deeply connected to cultural identity. Countries with long historical traditions appreciated the film's recreation of ancient civilization. At the same time, audiences throughout Asia, Australia, and Latin America embraced its universal themes of family, justice, sacrifice, and honor. The story required little cultural translation because its emotional core resonated across national boundaries. One particularly interesting aspect of Gladiator's financial success was its appeal to multiple generations. Older audiences appreciated its classical storytelling and historical setting. Younger viewers enjoyed its action sequences and memorable characters. Families often attended together despite the film's serious subject matter. This unusually broad demographic contributed significantly to its long theatrical lifespan. Rather than appealing only to one age group, Gladiator became an event film attracting diverse audiences. Critical reception also played a major role in sustaining commercial momentum. Professional reviewers praised the film's direction, performances, production design, cinematography, music, and emotional storytelling. Although some historians pointed out historical inaccuracies, even many of them acknowledged the film's remarkable atmosphere and dramatic effectiveness. Strong reviews reassured hesitant audiences that Gladiator offered more than visual spectacle. It possessed genuine artistic value. Awards season dramatically increased the film's commercial profile. As nominations accumulated, public interest continued growing. Many viewers who had missed the theatrical release decided to watch the film after hearing about its critical recognition. The Academy Awards proved especially significant. Gladiator received numerous nominations across major categories. Most importantly, it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. One of the strongest indicators of a film's lasting legacy is the community that forms around it long after its theatrical release. While many successful movies enjoy brief periods of popularity before gradually fading from public attention, Gladiator has experienced the opposite. More than 2 decades after its release in 2000, it continues to inspire passionate discussions, fan theories, artistic tributes, historical debates, online communities, and repeated viewings by audiences around the world. Its fandom is unique because it extends far beyond traditional movie enthusiasts. Historians, filmmakers, military enthusiasts, philosophers, musicians, writers, actors, students, and casual movie fans have all found different reasons to admire the film. As a result, Gladiator has developed one of the most diverse and enduring fan communities of any historical epic. One reason the film has maintained such an active following is its remarkable rewatch value. Many blockbuster films rely heavily on surprise twists or spectacular action sequences that lose some impact after the first viewing. Gladiator functions differently. Every time audiences return to the film, they notice new emotional details, symbolic imagery, historical references, character motivations, and subtle performances that may have gone unnoticed before. A first-time viewer often focuses on the major events: the opening battle, the betrayal, the gladiator fights, the confrontation with Commodus, the emotional ending. However, repeated viewings reveal deeper layers. The changing relationship between Maximus and Proximo, the political conversations in the Senate, the symbolism of the wheat fields, the emotional decline of Commodus, the careful use of silence, the recurring visual motifs. These discoveries encourage audiences to revisit the film repeatedly, strengthening long-term engagement. One of the earliest forms of gladiator fandom developed through internet discussion forums during the early 2000s. Online communities dedicated countless conversations to analyzing the film's themes, historical accuracy, favorite scenes, memorable dialogue, and hidden symbolism. Some fans debated Roman history. Others discussed Ridley Scott's directing style. Many analyzed Hans Zimmer's unforgettable score. Some focused almost entirely on Russell Crowe's performance. The internet allowed audiences from different countries to share interpretations and discoveries, transforming Gladiator from a successful film into an ongoing cultural conversation. As social media platforms later emerged, these discussions expanded dramatically. Fans began sharing favorite quotes, short clips, behind-the-scenes photographs, artwork, character analysis, scene breakdowns, historical comparisons. Even decades after release, Gladiator regularly appears in online conversations whenever people discuss the greatest historical films ever made. Its most memorable dialogue has become especially influential. Lines such as "What we do in life echoes in eternity" have spread far beyond the movie itself. Many people recognize the quotation without immediately remembering where it originated. The phrase has appeared in motivational speeches, leadership seminars, books, documentaries, social media posts, and discussions about legacy. Similarly, Maximus' declaration inside the Colosseum has become one of cinema's most recognizable moments. Fans frequently reference it when discussing unforgettable movie scenes. The emotional power of these lines has helped preserve the film's popularity across generations. The character of Maximus himself has become an enduring symbol of honorable leadership. Unlike many action heroes whose popularity depends primarily upon physical strength, Maximus is admired because of his moral character. Fans often describe him as representing qualities that feel increasingly rare: integrity, humility, self-sacrifice, loyalty, compassion, courage. Because these virtues remain universally respected, Maximus continues inspiring audiences regardless of changing cultural trends. Many leadership courses, business discussions, and military training programs have even referenced his character when exploring ethical leadership. Although Gladiator is not intended as an educational textbook, its portrayal of honorable leadership resonates far beyond entertainment. Russell Crowe's performance has inspired particularly passionate admiration. Many fans consider Maximus to be the defining role of his career. Discussions frequently compare the performance with other legendary cinematic heroes. Viewers often praise the emotional restraint he brings to the role. Instead of relying on dramatic speeches or exaggerated heroism, Crowe communicates much of Maximus' emotional life through quiet expressions, body language, and subtle reactions. This understated style has encouraged countless analyses exploring why the performance remains so convincing. Joaquin Phoenix has developed an equally devoted following because of his portrayal of Commodus. Interestingly, many fans describe Commodus as one of the greatest movie villains ever created despite finding him deeply unsettling. His insecurity, jealousy, emotional instability, and desperate need for approval distinguish him from more conventional antagonists. Online discussions frequently explore his psychology. Some fans examine his childhood. Others analyze his relationship with Marcus Aurelius. Many debate whether Commodus was capable of redemption before his corruption became irreversible. The complexity of his character continues, generating thoughtful discussion decades later. Another fascinating aspect of Gladiator fandom involves historical debate. Professional historians and history enthusiasts often discuss which aspects of the film accurately represent ancient Rome and which elements were fictionalized. Some viewers enjoy identifying historical inaccuracies. Others defend the filmmaker's creative choices by emphasizing emotional storytelling over documentary precision. Rather than damaging the film's reputation, these debates have actually strengthened its cultural influence. Many people first became interested in Roman history because Gladiator inspired them to learn more about the real empire. Teachers have occasionally reported students developing curiosity about ancient civilization after watching the movie. When Gladiator premiered in May of 2000, it was immediately recognized as an impressive historical epic, but few people could have predicted the extraordinary legacy it would leave behind. At the time, audiences praised its spectacular battle scenes, emotional storytelling, unforgettable performances, and breathtaking recreation of ancient Rome. Critics admired Ridley Scott's ambitious direction and Russell Crowe's commanding performance, while moviegoers embraced the film as both thrilling entertainment and moving drama. More than 25 years later, however, Gladiator is viewed through an even broader perspective. Time has transformed it from a successful blockbuster into one of the defining films of modern cinema. Today, it is regularly discussed alongside the greatest historical epics ever made, and its reputation has continued to grow rather than diminish. One of the most remarkable aspects of Gladiator's legacy is how well it has aged. Many blockbuster films released around the year 2000 were praised upon release, but now appear dated because of changing visual effects technology, shifting storytelling trends, or references tied to their specific era. Gladiator has largely avoided these problems. Modern audiences continue discovering the film for the first time and often react with the same emotional intensity experienced by viewers during its original theatrical release. This lasting appeal comes from the fact that Gladiator is built upon timeless human experiences rather than temporary cultural trends. Family, honor, justice, love, loss, leadership, sacrifice, hope. These themes remain just as meaningful today as they were when the film first appeared. Because the emotional core never depends upon contemporary politics or popular culture, the story feels surprisingly modern despite taking place nearly 2,000 years in the past. Perhaps the most significant change in Gladiator's reputation concerns Ridley Scott himself. Although Scott was already respected before directing Gladiator, the film has increasingly come to be viewed as one of the defining achievements of his career. Earlier classics, such as Alien and Blade Runner, had established him as one of cinema's great visual directors. Gladiator demonstrated something equally important: his ability to combine large-scale spectacle with profound emotional storytelling. Modern reassessments frequently identify Gladiator as the film that perfectly balanced Scott's extraordinary visual imagination with deeply human characters. Many critics now consider it one of his finest works. Russell Crowe's performance has also gained even greater appreciation over time. During the film's original release, audiences immediately recognized his commanding screen presence. However, modern viewers often focus more closely on the remarkable restraint of his performance. Unlike many action heroes, Maximus rarely delivers lengthy speeches or exaggerated emotional outbursts. Crowe communicates grief through silence, strength through calmness, leadership through example, pain through subtle facial expressions. Repeated viewings reveal countless small performance choices that may not be immediately noticeable during the excitement of a first viewing. Today, Maximus is widely regarded as one of cinema's greatest heroic characters. Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Commodus has undergone an equally fascinating reassessment. Initially, audiences praised him for creating a memorable villain. Years later, critics often describe Commodus as one of the most psychologically complex antagonists in modern filmmaking. Rather than portraying evil as simple cruelty, Phoenix presents insecurity, emotional need, jealousy, loneliness, and desperation. Modern audiences have become increasingly interested in psychologically layered villains, making Commodus feel even more relevant than he did in 2000. Many viewers now recognize how much emotional vulnerability Phoenix incorporated beneath the character's terrifying behavior. One area where opinions have evolved concerns historical accuracy. When Gladiator was first released, many historians criticized the film for altering major historical events. Marcus Aurelius did not die the way the movie portrays. Maximus never existed. Commodus was not killed in the Colosseum. Political events were heavily simplified. These criticisms remain factually valid. However, modern reassessment has become more nuanced. Many historians now distinguish between factual accuracy and historical authenticity. Although the specific events are fictionalized, the film successfully captures broader truths about Roman society: political ambition, military power, public spectacle, social inequality, imperial corruption, the importance of gladiatorial games. As a result, many scholars now acknowledge that while Gladiator should never be treated as a documentary, it succeeds remarkably well as historical drama. Its emotional truth often proves more significant than literal precision. The film's visual effects have also aged exceptionally well. At the time of release, audiences admired the recreation of ancient Rome, but few fully appreciated how carefully practical filmmaking had been combined with digital enhancement. Today, many viewers revisit Gladiator after watching modern effects-heavy blockbusters and are surprised by how realistic its world still appears. The reason becomes clear upon closer examination. Real sets, real costumes, practical props, physical locations, actual horses, hundreds of extras. Computer-generated imagery expands these practical elements rather than replacing them. This balanced approach prevents the film from feeling visually outdated. Modern filmmakers frequently cite Gladiator as an example of how practical craftsmanship and digital technology can work together effectively. Hans Zimmer's musical score has arguably become even more celebrated with time. Originally praised for its emotional power, it is now widely considered one of the greatest film soundtracks ever composed. Many pieces from the score are regularly performed in concert. Film music enthusiasts frequently rank it among Zimmer's finest achievements. Lisa Gerrard's haunting vocals remain instantly recognizable. The soundtrack has developed an independent cultural life beyond the movie itself. Many listeners who have never seen Gladiator still recognize its music. The film's themes have also become increasingly relevant.